So we assume that you are already hearing this in our YouTube as well. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this webinar on global environmental synthesis reports. And what we have now is this is a workshop that is organized on two platforms. And in our other platform, Zoom, we are still waiting for some of the participants. So I'm going to just ask you to be patient, and we actually start in a minute or in 30 seconds so that we are sure to have everyone online. Might be that in YouTube also we have late entrants who are only just clicking in, and this is how we are really busy in this webinar and web meeting times. Okay, let us start. So welcome everyone to the webinar on global synthesis on environmental reports or synthesis of global environmental reports webinar that we have today. The webinar is organized by the Finnish Environment Institute, the Ympäristötiedon Foorumi, the Finnish Nice Science Policy Platform for environmental knowledge, and then also the Ministry of Environment. And we are having this seminar in some way as a continuation to a webinar that we held a bit over a year ago on the global environmental reports. And this was very useful for us thinking how to implement global environmental reports. And today we focus on the synthesis and the overlaps between different environmental reports. So there are these global environmental assessment reports that are designed to collate knowledge and their current understanding and convey that to decision making, global decision making and national decision making. And they're designed to support policy. And they are also the entire processes around these reports are in some way science policy interfaces. These are in some ways in their own processes and own kind of systems. So we have the climate report, the biodiversity assessment in the IPBES platform. We have the sustainable development goals. And there is a really clearly recognized need that there is a lot of room for improving the coordination and also the communication between these different assessments, because the global problems, national problems, the environmental issues and challenges that we face, they are so complex and they happen in real social, societal systems. So there are then national and international bodies and organizations and specific processes that are designed to bridge these different reports. And that's what we are talking about today. And a good example is a recent global synthesis report, Making Peace with Nature. And we actually have today an author of this report with us. So these syntheses then that bring together the messages of various environmental assessments, they are designed to be even more clear in their communicating the messages and in being useful and generating impact. And today we try and think of how this impact could be then generated at the national level. So you who are watching this in YouTube, you will now have the opportunity to listen to our two wonderful keynote speakers. And then we have participants in Zoom who will spend the whole morning actually discussing the science policy interface and the operationalization of the messages of the synthesis reports. Maybe I remind that in Finland we have the science policy panels or the scientific panels that support the science policy mechanism. So we have a climate panel, we have what we call nature panel, but this is the counterpart of the IPBES panel in Finland. And then we have the Sustainable Development panel. And these are very important, and we have the panel members participating in the workshops later in the morning. So this public webinar is organized in 2 platforms, like I've said. So you can also, if you have comments or questions, you can write your comments and questions in the chat in your platform, and we will check those. And with this kind of short intro, I think that I will now start introducing our super important and interesting keynote speakers. Our first keynote speaker is Andrea Hinwood. She's the chief scientist at the United Nations Environment Programme, UNEP. She's an environmental scientist and also an environmental epidemiologist by background. And she has worked in the science policy interface at different levels, also in her home country, Australia. She works as the chief scientist at UNEP to coordinate at the very strategic level, and also then to try, she's really seeking in her work to generate impact with science. And that is what she will talk to us about today. Her talk title is Promoting Synergies Between Global Environmental Assessments, Focus for Impact. With that, I would like to welcome Andrea and give the floor to her.
Thank you very much, Eva. That's a very nice introduction, and I would very much like to thank the organisers for inviting me today. I'm just going to take a minute to upload my presentation, and as I'm doing so, I would really like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I meet you today. And of course, my presentation is, hopefully you can now see it.
Yes, we can see. It's in the slide mode.
Terrific. So before I start, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I'm coming to you today. It's the Whadjuk Noongar people, and I'd like to acknowledge the elders past, present and emerging, and to acknowledge their continuing connection with the land. It's something that we're very privileged to deal with. So I'm going to be talking about promoting synergies between global environmental assessments with a focus on impact. But more broadly, I'm probably going to be raising more questions that I actually provide information to you today. So you'll have to forgive me for that, but I'm hoping that that will generate some interest and some discussion down the track. I wanted to make it clear that UNEP talks about 3 planetary crises. Climate stability is one of our strategic objectives that we need to achieve as a result of greenhouse gas emissions and, of course, trying to achieve net zero. We want to achieve living in harmony with nature, and we also want to work towards a pollution-free planet. And this is where this issue of synthesis and integration of environmental issues comes about, because all of those activities that generate pollution all produce greenhouse gases. In terms of pollution and waste, they also impact on biodiversity. Changes in land use impact on climate change. Changes in land use often generate pollution, which also then has other unintended consequences. So I think this audience understands very well that they are all interconnected, and we need to deal with them in a holistic way. And I guess this key question of whether we're dealing with synthesis of knowledge and will it help us deal with these crises, perhaps rather than looking at the more siloed approach, which has been traditional. So in terms of global environmental outlooks and environmental assessments, approximately 160 global assessments have been undertaken. I think what's really interesting about these global assessments, and it's a question that we are also going to consider today, is how do we make global assessments more relevant nationally, regionally and locally? And then how do we actually use the local, regional and building up to global assessments? These global assessments are really important because they are science-based, and they also represent a consensus across the globe. And one of the interesting bits in my former roles that I have noticed is the difficulty with which we've actually had with science to actually get agreements on core science. And of course, if we're talking about global environmental issues and we're talking about impact, we absolutely need to achieve that consensus across a broad range of stakeholders so we can actually achieve some good outcomes. So I think it's fantastic that we've got 160 global assessments. And of course, they are absolutely critical to help us create collective action to actually deal with the environmental issues that they are the subject of. Most of them have been approached on a broad issue basis. I mentioned the 3 planetary crises, so we're tending to talk about climate change, biodiversity loss, or conservation, and pollution and waste. Until relatively recently, where we're actually starting to look at the integration of issues. These global environmental outlooks or environmental assessments are generally based on complex resource and expert intensive processes where they generate a consensus view. I have to say, personally, I really like this approach of actually achieving consensus because sometimes it can be quite challenging. And as I say, I have seen with time an increasing politicisation of some of the science in some of these fora. And I think it's very important that we work very hard on that. I think one of the other benefits of these global assessments is they're systematic, and in the way that they're conducted with the systems and processes that are put in place. And that actually is really important in terms of the outcomes and then wanting to drive the impact that we need across the globe for environmental change. One of the disbenefits is probably that we do have that global focus. And I talk about this reducing variability and local noise. Whenever you have a wide range of environmental issues which are based at a country level, there will be an enormous range of impact across the different environmental sectors. So if we take air quality, we can see very good air quality in some of the Nordic states. And then, of course, if we go to some of our developing countries, we've got appalling air quality. So the variability across the globe in terms of the environmental issues and the challenges in actually addressing those can sometimes be challenging at a global level. And sometimes that global focus can take out that variability, which is so important to understand. So again, when we're looking at cross-cutting issues, some of these things need to be considered. I think it's useful to show this image, and thanks to Jason Jabor for providing this, which just shows the increase in the integrated scientific assessments, which you can see on the blue line, the multilateral environmental agreements in the red line, and the period of hyperglobalization. And as you can see, we are seeing a big increase in integrated scientific assessments because I think we realise from an impact standpoint that's something we have to achieve, and that we're also seeing a plateauing of the multilateral environmental agreements, many of which are based on not single issues but categories of issues. So how are global environmental assessments evolving? As noted in the former image, we've got a substantial increase in scientific knowledge. We've got a big increase in experts and participants in some of these assessments. We need to deal with an enormous amount of data, information and knowledge, which previously we didn't necessarily have access to in real time, but of course we now have the tools to be able to obtain a lot more data, information and knowledge, including scientific literature, much more quickly. That also increases the challenge of actually dealing with that substantial knowledge and to try to actually draw some firm conclusions from it. And we're also dealing with complex systems. At the outset, Ava said, we're dealing with society, politics, economics, etc. And what we've recently seen with measuring the SDG report, the Measuring Progress report, which came out recently, was that some of the drivers we couldn't necessarily link with outcomes. And what that shows us is maybe we didn't have the data, but maybe we also have got complexity in the system that we need to deal with so that we can actually have a look at some of those influence on, say, the Sustainable Development Goals. We're also looking at more multi-scalar, multi-dimensional nature of issues, and we're exploring those questions a lot more in the way that we're looking at these global environmental assessments. And of course, we need to consider a broader array of interrelationships and disciplines, and that particularly relates to data science, the different ways that we're actually analysing information, the inclusion of social and behavioural sciences, the inclusion of political disciplines, and a range of others that we can perhaps talk about later. But the other thing about global environmental assessments, which is a common observation by many, is that we're restating the problem. And maybe we really need to be moving much more to these solutions. And I just wanted to restate this issue of the amount and volume of information that different assessments are having to deal with. And of course, this just shows you a graph, and thank you to Jason Jabor as well for providing this from the Cowich article. But this just shows you the increase in participants in terms of the IPCC assessment. And we also have the increase in scientific literature, which is really hard to get your head around. So what are we evolving to? And we're evolving much more to solutions focus and presentation of policy options. Why? We want to use the science to drive good policy, which is going to have an impact on the ground to improve environmental outcomes. So I use the terminology, the science of interventions. This is actually the science which shows us what is working, what isn't working, what sorts of options are available across a range of different settings, and importantly, acknowledging the difference among countries in terms of the environmental issues that might be front of mind. We also need to deal with the contested science and improving our research base efficiently, and how we do that. I always call science the nice safe space, because you can actually agree on what you can see, and you can also identify the areas that you don't agree on, and then how do you actually go about systematically assessing and working out how to resolve those questions of science you don't agree with. The other thing with solutions focused is to apply specific questions and scenarios. So one of the benefits of looking at solutions focused using our fundamental science is to work out how we can apply different levers and options in different settings. And I think that in terms of global environmental assessments in the future, maybe we need to look at how we develop these scenarios and what sorts of levers we pull to have the most impact. Of course, we need to look at increased engagement across stakeholders with skills in mediation. We need to deal with the cross-cutting issues that I talked about before, and becoming much more transdisciplinary as a matter of course, and to make our outcomes tangible, open, and accessible. It is absolutely critical for us now to make sure that everything that we report is available and accessible, and that we use the full suite of digital tools available. And of course, that we are more impactful, because we don't want to do all this work and not actually have an impact on the ground. So my topic was to have a focus on impact. So I think in terms of focusing, I think we need to be really clear on what question we are asking and what question we are answering, and how we're doing that, and that we're focused. That we are providing accessible, open, and transparent processes and outputs, and that includes that digital transformation and access. That we look at science and engagement across the silos, i.e. we integrate with a broader range of stakeholders, including business and industry, and as I said before, we integrate our issues and responses. I just wanted to quickly outline some of the resolutions and recommendations about this integration or increased coherence or coordination of global assessments. And I wanted to talk about resolution EA 423, which requested our executive director to promote greater coherence and coordination of global assessments undertaken with the United Nations in cooperation with relevant international bodies and MEAs. We also have requests to prepare a proposal for science policy input on the global environment. And we also have this resolution from the General Assembly in terms of multilateral environmental agreements and their scientific and technical bodies to coordinate in a number of ways. And then we have another recommendation to encourage the governing bodies of MEAs and scientific, technical and technological bodies to exchange information experiences, including a view to considering the streamlining of reporting and monitoring processes. All of this is aimed at this issue of looking at the cross-cutting issues, integration and synthesis of the science. Why? So that we can actually better inform our countries with the view of getting really good policy where we can generate impact. So UNEP has been coordinating the Ad Hoc Global Assessment Dialogue, and we have set up that forum to actually address some of the resolutions I've just talked about, but it also provides us with the opportunity to mainstream aspects of the environment across assessments, i.e. we mainstream climate change, we mainstream nature-based solutions, we mainstream behaviour science maybe across different assessments. We have the opportunity to share scenarios and policy debates, and this gets at our ability to actually, I call it the ecosystem of data, where we're actually able to layer the different aspects of some of our problems, and we pull the levers and we have a look at what impact they have. And then we're able to say, well, if we choose this particular policy, this is going to maybe make a 5% impact on this particular issue, but this one is 80%. And so it's an opportunity to be more deliberative in that exercise. It's an opportunity to enhance the science policy interface, which is what we're really on about. And of course, this aspect of progressing solutions. So with that, I would like to thank you. I look forward to answering any questions you have and for discussion on this issue. Thank you very much. And I will now try to stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Andrea. This was very, very inspiring and nice for us. It's also very concrete how you describe how when there are so many results and there are so many, individual results of individual studies that are compiled and brought together. And then there is what you talked about as deliberation or looking for agreement. So the science is contradictory in many places, and then you have to have the scientists actually discuss that on what basis can we say that this is about our knowledge level. So that was very nicely described. I think it's really good. One thing that I thought of like just afterwards was this, that how do you convey this to actually very political decision-making settings? Because in Finland, we tend to think in fairly administrative ways, because Finland has fairly strong administration, a fairly stable administration. And then there are moments when things turn political, and then everyone's a bit surprised at that point. Whereas in other settings, the politics might be the basic way of operating. Those are my thoughts that you might want to answer if there are no other questions. But now, everyone listening to this webinar, please type your questions in the chat, and we will then take them in the questions and answers. But before that, we will have Ivar Baste give his keynote. Ivar Baste is a senior advisor at the Norwegian Environment Agency, and he has previously been the Deputy Director General in the Norwegian Ministry of Environment. He is currently the co-chair of the Future of Geo Process Steering Committee. The GEO is the Global Environment Outlook. And he has served as, he was the lead of this Making Peace with Nature report that was mentioned earlier, that came out this year and is exciting for all of us. He has been involved in a number of these key processes, these assessment processes, since 1993 when they about started. So he's a good experienced mentor for the rest of us. And because of this multi-level experience that Ivar has as well, he will be in a good position to lead us to think how to generate, how to make these assessments actually help in sustainability transition. With that, I welcome Ivar, and your slides are up already.
Thank you very much, Eva, and good morning, everyone. It's indeed a pleasure to be here together with you. Let me actually start by trying to present a little bit of the findings from the UNEP's latest synthesis report. And then I'll talk a bit about the role of global assessments before I end by looking a bit at sort of how these global assessments can be applied, or how we take them forth at the national level, and how we generate action for sustainability. But let me actually start by showing you a picture that was taken on Christmas Eve, 1968. It's basically from the Apollo 8, it shows the Earth partly illuminated in the dark void of space, and against the lifeless surface of the moon, it becomes apparently clear that our planet is the nature planet, with its green continents, its blue oceans, and its white skies. Now, since then, 50 years ago, human development has taken us quite far. The global economy has grown by some. I'm just struggling a bit with yeah. Okay. So the global economy has grown nearly fivefold, and trade tenfold. Human population has doubled to 7.8 billion, and prosperity has on average also doubled. But still, 1.3 billion people remain poor, and some 700 million are hungry. And these staggering facts about human expansion on Earth are really the starting point for the analysis put forth in the synthesis report from UNEP. Now, the report has been given the title "Making Peace with Nature," and it was presented and launched by the Secretary General Antonio Guterres in February. And the title is really inspired by him, because he has called on the world to end the senseless and suicidal war on nature and make peace with nature. So this endeavor is really an input to the commemoration of the 50 years anniversary of UNEP, which takes place next year in 2022. And we've been about 50 experts that have been involved in synthesizing the latest assessments, including from IPCC, IPBES, and the GEO. The analysis really demonstrates that the messages across these assessments are consistent. And what we see is that the environmental challenges have grown in numbers and severity ever since the 1972 Stockholm Conference on the Human Environment, which really was the start of international cooperation on environmental and sustainability issues in the world. So we're now basically facing climate, biodiversity, and pollution emergency, as Andrea also stressed. And this report is presented as some kind of a blueprint for how to tackle them. So let me try to give you a few sort of highlights from the report. First of all, let's look at meat weight of mammals on Earth. Most of us feel quite small and insignificant compared with the vast Earth, but point is, it's no longer vast. Humans now dominate and have a major impact on Earth, as this figure illustrates. So of the combined biomass of mammals, human population now constitutes about a third, and the livestock, which is mainly cattle actually, constitutes 2/3. Only 5% actually of the meat weight of mammals are wild mammals, and that's everything from whales to mice. So there's virtually not much space left for other mammals on Earth. Now, the human development is largely fueled by a tripling in the extraction of resources, including food, and the production of energy over the past 50 years. That has generated waste and pollution. It's generated a doubling of the greenhouse gas emissions. Now, this figure basically shows global primary energy consumption of the world. And you can see that the growth is largely attributed to growth in fossil fuels, coal in black, the oil in pink, or gas in light blue. As we know, then fossil fuel is really the key source of carbon dioxide, which accounts for about 2/3 of the warming from greenhouse gases. Then the picture becomes quite clear. If you look at the bioenergy in yellow at the bottom here, it's almost at the level of pre-industrial times. On the very top, you see hydropower in blue and nuclear power in pink. And on top of everything is a thin blue, green line, and that's renewables. And although that is really growing exponentially now, this figure kind of illustrates the scale of human dependence on fossil fuels, its enabling role in the human expansion on Earth, and it also serves to illustrate why halting global warming is such a tall order. Now, with expansion comes the need for space. 3/4 of ice-free land and 2/3 of oceans are now impacted by humans. This figure shows the global use of ice-free land and is actually adapted from IPCC. Reason is clear. I mean, 1/4 of global warming also results from activities related to land use. If you look at some of the macro picture here, 1/4 of land has been radically transformed to cropland, plantations, and other human use. Half of habitable land on Earth is now used for food production. The remaining 1/3 of near natural land is projected to be only 10% by 2050 if we continue on our current path. Well, okay, this has all resulted in an interconnected climate, biodiversity, and pollution emergency. I think the facts are really well known to this audience. So I've just sort of displayed some of the facts here. I don't want to go into it all, but clearly we're facing risks from climate change to people and nature. It's getting increasingly severe. Pollution still kills and destroys. I mean, 9 million premature deaths from indoor and outer air pollution, but also other sources, chemicals from water pollution. The loss of biodiversity is unprecedented and accelerating, and it's really all this undermining human well-being. We're going well beyond the limits agreed in international agreements. Society is nowhere close to fulfill the Paris Agreement. None of the ACHI targets on biodiversity has been fully met. Well, what does this all mean? Well, it means that it really threatens the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goal, the blueprint for development of the world, as Secretary General of the UN has put it. So this version of a diagram, which is often referred to as the cake diagram, is taken from GEO. And you can see, I mean, without going into the details, that human well-being goals in the upper ring rests on the production and consumption goals in the middle ring, which in all of these goals then in turn is based on the goals related to nature. Two very important points in the report: the burden of environmental decline weighs heaviest on the poor and vulnerable. They're already experiencing it, but it looms even larger over today's young and future generations. And the more we delay action, the more it will take those coming after us to solve the problem. So despite this bleak analysis, report hits an optimistic zone. We think that human knowledge, ingenuity, technology, and fantastic skill set cooperation. Yes, we fight sometimes, well, quite often, but we're even better at cooperation. And we think that can transform societies and economies and help us secure a sustainable future. But that would actually involve fundamental changes in technological, economic, and social organization of society, including the worldviews, norms, and values and governance. We need major shifts in investments and regulations that are key to just informed transitions. And we also need to overcome inertia and opposition from vested interests. But that's possible if we work towards common shared knowledge across sectors and silos in society, if we set targets that are long-term so that these often legitimate vested interests can plan and adjust accordingly. So we think that this transition can be done without surrendering hard-won development gains, which are quite stunning over the last 50 years. but we also need to make sure that we honor the rightful aspirations of the poorer nations and people to enjoy better living standards. This infographic basically tries to sum up the scientific blueprint for the shift to sustainability. In very shortly, we need to shift from transforming nature on the left-hand red side here to transforming humankind's relationship with nature. That means that we need to move from today's degradation and surpassing of the Earth's finite capacity to support human well-being and go towards restoring, respecting, and adapting to this capacity. And first of all, we need to transform the economic and financial system so that they can lead and power the shift to sustainability. We need the food and water and energy systems to be transformed. We need to promote healthy lives and well-being for all in safe cities and settlements. We need to address the climate and biodiversity and pollution emergencies together. We know we need to reach net zero carbon dioxide emission by 2050. We need to manage chemicals and waste. We need recycling of resources. We need to give nature enough space through dedicated protected areas and sustainable use of land and oceans. I mean, there's a lot to it, but this just sort of sums up a few of the highlights. And well, how on earth do we get a polycentric society to move and take part in this transition? Well, first we need everyone to sign up for a common vision, which basically is the indivisible and integrated SDGs, and we need all actors to have a role to play in it. So we've here highlighted the need to address the environmental emergencies together, the need to transform the economic and financial systems, the need to transform food and water and energy systems as some highlights. And then we've gone through sort of the role of different actors from governments via intergovernmental organizations, financial organizations, private sector, non-governmental organizations, individuals, all of us, the decisions we take when we travel, when we buy stuff, when we throw away all the stuff that we bought, and not the least, what the scientific and educational community can do. So hopefully this synthesis report goes to show that there is a lot that needs to be done also by the knowledge community. And I'll try to sort of move a little bit towards that now for the last part of my talk. The knowledge is incredibly important. It's important to counter our tendency to rely on myths, to counter the tendency to rely on fake news and of adding up apples and oranges, as this signboard here illustrates. If you take a closer look, the total there is a mishmash of all sorts of stuff. So society needs to use its unprecedented knowledge capacities for identifying and embarking upon the transformational pathways to a sustainable future, but that is not enough. So equally important, the knowledge must be understood, owned and acted upon by the many decision-making entities that make up today's polycentric world, and it needs to be understood and also by those who have to follow all the rules and regulations. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, at the international level, both challenges can be addressed through the intergovernmental expert-led international assessment, and Andrea talked quite a bit about it. They're really designed to create an agreed knowledge base across geographical borders, across socioeconomic sectors, across scientific disciplines, and knowledge systems. And this is all needed in order to facilitate international cooperation, which is really multifaceted. Now, the global assessments like IPCC, IPBES, GEO are designed as science policy interface processes. They are bridging organizations. They are basically standing in the crossroad between science and policy, and they are designed for policy relevance, scientific credibility, and legitimacy in the science policy interface, and they follow rather elaborate iterative processes, as this snake diagram that is taken from the IPBES guide on assessment illustrates. And here, actually, the synthesis report that we conducted fall a bit short of involving member states and representatives in the process, although actually the synthesis report itself is largely based on assessments that do. Now, a few very quick things that characterizes these assessments is that they have intergovernmental oversight and authorization processes. They have multidisciplinary science oversight that ensures the independence and authorship of the assessments. And then they follow very elaborate processes for request and planning and scoping and deciding what the assessment should be all about. Very elaborate processes for ensuring expert synthesis and evaluation of the knowledge collective such. Expert governance and stakeholder review, clearance of the process in terms of improvement and authorization of the products, and then also focus on the use of findings and the knowledge dialogue and support for policy. Now, the question is really, I think, one that we could ask at least briefly. How do we get then from the global assessment for international cooperation to the national actions for sustainability? International cooperation is really key to tackling the tripling environmental emergencies, and embedded in international cooperation are the obligations for national action. So while global assessments can help frame national action, they very often lack the level of resolution needed to inform the very complex choices that needs to be made at national level and local level for that matter. So the question is, could the global assessment processes be applied and customized to national level in order to power the shift to national sustainability? And if so, could domestic policymakers from different sectors assume the oversight and authorizing role that the government representatives play in the global ones? Well, these are a few of the questions that would arise then if one were to do this. This diagram basically is the same as for the global one. The key thing is sort of how would one structure intersectoral oversight and authorization? Would it involve both political and administrative level? Would it be two chambers? Would such assessment include different thematic issues? Would they be integrated? How would one go about the clearance process? There are a number of questions here. I'll just sort of post them very briefly. Perhaps that is something that the workshop that will take place after this webinar could look into. Key thing is that it is really demanding to achieve the green transition. It's really something that all countries are grappling with. I think we need to look into our toolkit in order to achieve it and see whether we need new tools, whether we can refigure tools to be applied to different levels, such as the global assessment to national level. And with that, I thank you a lot for your attention and hand back to you, Eva.
Thank you, Ivar. This was very good. I forgot to introduce myself at the start. So I'm Eva Primer from the Finnish Environment Institute, where I'm research director, but importantly, I'm also a member of the International Resources Panel. That's an expert panel under the UNEP. And I am leading a transitions report at the moment where we try and consolidate the policy message. And your talk, Ivar, makes me think that there are these really nice illustrations, really nice concrete simplifications, and then we go to the very complex issues of both governing the societies and the complexity of the societies themselves, and we try and convey this like simple message so that it would at least draw the attention, but then like work with the complexity. I mean, this is a huge challenge, very, very inspiring. Okay, now it would be nice, we don't have any questions in the chat that I am looking at, but it would be a wonderful opportunity for anyone to ask a question here in the Zoom chat or in the YouTube chat. And now I will ask, I think Maria is following the YouTube chat. If you, Maria, want to share if there are any questions that have come there.
So far, we don't have any questions or comments in YouTube, so please go ahead here.
And if someone wants to actually raise a hand or ask a question, I will ask more questions if no one has what I will do while you are thinking your questions, and you could also write just comments. It would be nice to get feedback to these really nice talks. I will now ask Andrea how you see that the reports communicate to administrative decision making on the one hand and political decision making on the other hand.
It's a very, very good question. So I think the global assessments are fantastic at the political level because, of course, when they are targeted from global issues across collective countries, then in terms of getting that coalition of the willing and those groups of countries who are going to undertake a particular action based on the reports that they've got, that then will tend to lead to other actions. So, you know, they are incredibly important at that political level to actually, I guess, underscore the importance of the issues that are being communicated. I think it gets much more challenging at the national level because of the national circumstances, which is what I was trying to get at in my presentation. And I think that's where we actually have the opportunity to perhaps do some tailoring of the message for particular national governments. And I know that they make up the global, and I know that they influence as well. But in terms of domestic policy changes, etc., we perhaps might need to tailor our messages to take the global to those local circumstances. And, you know, we often hear the feedback that you've got to make these statements about saving the world more tangible for the people who have to implement it. And I think that's where we need to move in terms of providing more solutions. Now, we can do that at the global level, but we can also do it in terms of providing that overall support at the more local level.
Mm-hmm. There is another question that relates to this, what you are describing, Andrea. I'm still thinking that in politics, you sometimes cherry pick some of the findings and you really ignore others. And that was what I had in mind about the very political. But a good question. Are there any ways for these mechanisms that we are talking about that mandate the synthesis reports or the global assessments? Are there any mechanisms that they could really enforce the national processing of the results?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I might get Ivar to actually answer that one. He might have a interesting perspective.
Yeah, please, Ivar.
No, I think actually the challenge is that that the global assessment they help frame national actions, but they do not have the high enough resolution to sort of inform all the different choices, political choices that needs to be made, and that and in a way the global assessments have been put in place in order to counter sort of countries cherry picking from the knowledge sources and say that, well, we do have a consensus knowledge base here. So the question I think that I'm increasingly asking myself is sort of, well, at the national level, sort of how do we kind of counter that tendency of cherry picking part of the knowledge puzzle and lifting a bit up and say, well, this is the answer. One of the sectors, most sectors have their own sort of knowledge generation systems, and they will sort of protect that, rightfully so. But sometimes you need processes that cuts across the different sectors, that cuts across different political aisles and whatnot, to agree on what are the facts and how do you level the sort of importance of the different elements in society. And I think that is when you need these kind of co-production processes where you involve both scientists and policymakers, so that you get to an agreed knowledge base that can help take society forward. Because moving or embarking on the shift to sustainability involves so complex decisions with so profound consequences that a prime minister or president need to be absolutely sure what he or she is doing. So we need, I think, much more elaborate processes to safeguard that transition. And as society changes, there will be new questions appearing. So one needs also the science community to be alert and on guard, and the science community also need to interact with the policy community to start addressing the right issues. So I think those sort of co-production processes, we need to think much more about sort of the role they can play in the transition towards sustainability.
Wonderful. I can fully agree with that. Yeah, Andrea, please.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that, because the other element, I think, in terms of the national side of things is also to have greater involvement of business, industry and other sectors. And I think at the national level, a lot of the politics is driven by particular sectors. And again, greater engagement of stakeholders in the processes, not just, you know, government, science and policymakers, but actually industry and business, etc., I think may also be a way that we can actually help drive some of these changes if they're actively involved. Makes it more complex, but also perhaps might end up allowing us to be more successful.
That is a very, very good point. Now we have a question here, but I will ask Maria also, that are there questions in the YouTube side?
Nope.
Okay, very good. Okay, there is a good question. I think that I might comment on this co-generation of knowledge, but this question is good. That sometimes these reports, when they come out, they add fairly little, or like in some way they accumulate almost the same knowledge, or they kind of repeat the messages that the previous reports have already stated fairly powerfully. Do you think that this repetition actually plays a role in delivering the message? Is the repetition useful?
My personal view of this is it's not helping the repetition, and I wonder if we need to provide other ways of getting the message across. In that, you know, if we keep saying, you know, we know that climate change is with us. We know that these changes are apparent. They're measurable. Many locations are feeling them and seeing them. And yet we're not able to then galvanise action in particular countries to deal with the issues. So I think that we do need to perhaps alter the message. And I wonder if it's time we need to be mindful of making sure people understand the significance of the crises that we are in. Like we must state that, but we also must be positive, because I think what's happening is a lot of people are going, it's too hard, I can't do anything about this, so I won't. So I'll just keep doing what I can. However, I think that if we start to change our language to be much more positive, which I believe we do have the tools to enable us to actually make changes, that we start to present the messages differently, to say, here are the benefits of this action, of which there are many. And for example, the co-benefits of addressing climate change will help pollution and waste and biodiversity and nature. And so for me, I'm thinking if we actually start to focus on that and change the way we're talking about the issues, we may actually have some shifts.
A very good viewpoint. Would you, Ivar, want to say just a word or two about this, and then we are coming close to?
No, I think that, I mean, I agree with Andrea. I think that basically in all our lives, actually, that we need somehow also to face realities which are harsh. I think we are all facing harsh realities in our lives. So I think we can easily sort of relate to the fact that there are some very difficult issues in the world. But that also needs to be combined with optimism that we actually are able to address these, and that in itself is quite fulfilling to be able to do it. And as a society, there are lots of opportunities that arise from doing it. And I think that also relates to the point that Andrea made earlier, that we need to bring in business and into the equation as well. I think we saw from the assessment on the ozone on the ozone assessments that business was very present, and they started acting even before the regulations were put in place. So sometimes business can also be a driver for regulations to be put in place, because it creates a level of playing field. Industry and business also see that there are opportunities and changes and transformations in society. So I very much agree that we need to have this very positive outlook, but I also think that we need to repeat. We need to repeat the messages, because that is also how the world is organized on other levels. We hear the same messages again and again, and I think we need them.
Very good. I would like to think of us as the kind of communicators, educators of our global family. And maybe so that if we repeat the message in the same way, like we would as parents to our children, and they close their ears because it's the same message that they've heard so many times. So perhaps when we are bringing the same message that we are very aware of, and we assume our children, our families, and our global community is aware of in the way that Andrea described, we might need to just say it in a different way each time, that we have to look for these new ways of communicating, even if the message is different. So for example, the youth becoming very empowered with the environmental issues and making a new movement recently is a very good example of just new rhetorics and new actors. And so this is quite nice. I would like to conclude with that. Thank you so much. I think that the co-production of knowledge is the take-home message for all of those who have been in the webinar part. And so we should produce the knowledge together. And in that, we are working with these messages that we quite strongly share, but we do need the communication between science, what science has to bring new and repeat the old, or in some way convey the old already understood facts, and do that in ways that speaks to people, politicians, industry, and the entire systems. So thank you very much to our great keynote speakers. Thank you to our audience in YouTube. This morning continues in Zoom for those who are in Zoom. So I will just say that you shouldn't close your Zoom when you go on a break, and you can come back then at 11:10. For those who are in YouTube, thank you for joining us. I hope you have taken these messages and you can take them forward in your practical work and think of new ways of communicating your facts about the environment and state of the environment, the trends and the solutions. And wishing everyone a really good morning. Now I feel that I have 3 minutes to spare, so maybe Ivar and Andrea, you can just say your last greetings if you want. 2 minutes actually, so not many.
I'll go. Look, thank you everyone. I think that we are all in this together, and I actually think it is our collectives, no matter where we're coming from, to actually be solutions focused and to actually start to look at different ways of actually solving some of these what seem to be intractable problems. But I think the good thing is this is a great point in time, because we do have that goal, and if we work together, I'm firmly of the view that we'll be able to sort it out. So I'm looking forward to actually working with all of you on our environmental future. And I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Andrea. And Ivar, your last words.
Oh, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to join you on this event. I really think that we need a narrative, we need a story that we all can rally around. I think people, as human beings, we really love stories, so we need a good narrative around the challenge that the environmental emergency represents and the opportunities it represents. And I think we have it, but we need to perhaps work a little bit more on it and apply it also at national level.
Wonderful, thank you. Thank you, everyone. And we close this webinar now, and the Zoom workshop continues at 11:10.